What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to work on how to factor a quadratic trinomial when our a is going to equal to 1. And we're going to do that by working through 10 problems that I have handpicked to help you through the process. I hope you enjoy.
Again, factoring is rewriting an expression as a product. But remember, what the product represents is the area. So right now, we know this represents the area of this rectangle. So I'm going to put r squared here and 12 here. But for my middle term, I only have two boxes. So that's when we go to our AC method, and we put 8 up top, and we put 12 on the bottom. And we want to identify what our I'm sorry, I put 12 up top. What two numbers multiply to give us 12 and add to give us 8? Well, we can say that's going to be 6r and 2r. So again, what we can take in here is r times r is going to give you r squared. R times what gives you 6r? That's going to be a positive 6. And then r times what gives you 2r, which would be a positive 2. Therefore, our two side lengths that multiply to give you your area is r plus 2 times r plus 6. Now, what I want you guys to understand for this first portion is that these two numbers are exactly the same terms as these. All right? So I'm using this box to give you a visual understanding of what exactly factoring, again, is when you're dealing with a trinomial. But basically, if you guys want to factor something, you can simply just look at these two values and understand those are going to be the two values that are going to be a part of your binomials, actually, that will give you this two side lengths to multiply for your trinomial. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So what I'd like to do is show you how to factor when a is equal to 1 for a trinomial. And there's kind of two different ways we like to do this. One is kind of just doing the process in our head, which I think once you get a lot of practice is obviously the way that you'd like to go. And the second method is what we call kind of like the diamond method, which I think is very helpful. Even though I don't really do a diamond, I kind of do an X. But still, the idea of it is just a way to kind of organize exactly what you'd be doing if you're doing it in your head anyways. But to kind of understand the diamond method, though, we would at least need to understand the standard form of a quadratic, which is ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, in this case, you can see we have our a is always 1. So we're going to kind of forget about our a. And we're just going to deal with b and c, where b is the coefficient of our linear term, and c is going to be our constant. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to alternate by doing each method either way. So the first one, the way I like to do it is just using the die method. If you really have no understanding of your factoring, basically all we simply want to do is take this form. See, there's no, we want to rewrite this as a product of two factors. Two expressions that when we multiply them are going to provide this trinomial. So to do that, what we do is we label c and b, where c is our constant, and b is our coefficient of our linear term. So c in this case is 5, and b in this case is c. And basically what we want to be able to do is say, all right, what two numbers multiply to give us 5, but then add to give us 6? So to do that, we literally just take the number 5, and we say, what are the two numbers that multiply to give us 5? Well, 5 is a prime number, so the only two numbers that multiply to give us 5 are 5 and 1. So then on the sides, we write down those numbers. Now, again, 5 times 1 is not going to give us this whole expression, right? So I need to write it as a product of its factors. So by factoring this, what I will obtain is look like this: x plus 5 times x plus 1. And basically, ladies and gentlemen, it's kind of as simple as that. I didn't really go into explaining on why we're doing or how everything works like that. But if you remember, if you go back to FOIL, right, we learned how to multiply binomials. When we go to FOIL and you apply FOIL, what you'll notice is by multiplying these two binomials, you're going to obtain this trinomial. All right? So now you kind of have a basic idea of when you factor a trinomial, you're going to get two binomials. So if we're going to do this in our head, let's just take a look at, well, we know it's going to be two factors, right? Two factors. And what's nice about having x squared and where a is 1, we know that the first two terms have to be x times x, right? I have to multiply x times x to give me x squared. So now I just need to determine what are these two numbers. What are the two numbers that are going to multiply to give me 10? right? But remember, from using this diamond method, we're not only concerned about what two numbers multiply to give us our constant, but then out of those numbers, what two numbers multiply to give us our middle term. So basically, when I'm doing this in my head, what I'm thinking about is what two numbers multiply to give me negative 10, and what two numbers add to give me negative 3. So now this kind of comes into a dilemma. Why did I only pick 5 and 1? Because not always is the answer just going to be that problem. Because what are the factors of negative 10? Well, this can be kind of confusing here. Because negative 10, I can have a negative 10 times positive 1. I can also do positive 10 times negative 1, right? Both of those numbers are going to multiply to give you negative 10. The same thing I can do negative 5 times 2 and 5 times negative 2. So when you have a negative number as your constant, you have to know that one of those factors has to be negative. Now, here's a little trick. When you're looking at your middle term, you say, all right, what two numbers, I'm multiplying to give me a negative number. What two numbers are going to add to give me negative? Well, the larger of your factor has to be negative. That means the only two possible options I have are negative 10 and 1, which do not add to negative 3, and negative 5 and 2, which do add to negative 3. So therefore, I can write them in negative 5 and positive 2. And since you have x and x, it's not really going to matter which way you write that in there. And so which also brings me back to this case, though. This also could have been written as negative 1 times negative 5. But the reason why I didn't even start confusing you at the beginning is because the middle term is positive. So the only two factors have to also be positive. All right? So let's continue on here. So now I have a little bit larger one. I have x squared plus 12x minus 28. So now, basically, let's go back to the diamond method. So I say, all right, 28, what two numbers multiply to give me 28, but then add to give me positive 12. So I go and notice this is a negative 28. But the difference is this is negative, that was negative. But now your middle term was negative, so that meant the negative number had to be, my larger factor had to be negative. Now my middle term is positive. That means the larger factor is always going to be positive. So rather than writing out negative 10, positive 1, positive 10, negative 1, I'm just going to write the larger factor. I'm just going to write down all the factors, but I'm just going to make the larger factor negative. So let's write the factors for 28. So I have 28, so I can do 28 times 1. I can do 14 times 2. 3, I can do 6, 8. 6 does not go into there, but 4 times 7. And I believe that's it. All right? Yes. OK. So those are my three factors. Now again, let's write the larger factors over here on the side. So remember, I said that since my middle term is positive, the larger terms all have to be positive. That means these all have to be negative. So by combining these, which is the only two that gives me positive 14? You can see it's positive 14 and negative 2. So therefore, by writing my factors, I have x plus 14 times x minus 2. Very good, right? So let's go and move on to the last one, which I have x squared minus 8x plus 16. Again, guys, if I was just going to do this in my head, I have x times x times x. All right? Now, notice that I have a positive 16, right? So I want to write all the factors of 16, just like what we did here. But now, notice my middle term is negative. So rather than writing the positive, because the reason why I wrote the positive factors for 5, because my middle term was positive. Now my middle term is negative. So when I'm writing the factors of 16, I'm only concerned about them both being negative. OK? And what you see is which two terms, when I add these up, are going to give me negative 8. Obviously, that's x minus 4 times x minus 4, which is actually a perfect square trinomial, which I can write later. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is kind of like your basic definition and ways to be able to factor a quadratic when a is equal to 1. Thanks.
Two numbers multiply to give us 15, but add to give us 8. And we say that's going to be a 3 and a 5. So what that tells us to do now is, look, I can rewrite this as a 3x and a 5x. All right? So if I was to write all of this out, you guys remember when we did the rules? Marielle, what I did is I did x squared plus 3x plus 5x plus 15. When I write that out, does that give me that answer? Yes. So I now have this area is what that represents. I just represent it in a different way. So now what I need to do is I need to figure out what the side lengths are. I know that x times x gives you x squared, but x times what gives you 3x? And then x times what gives you 5x? So this times this gives you 5x. This times x gives you 5x. All right. So therefore, now what I've just created is x plus 5 times x plus 3. And remember, so we say, well, so now I've taken an expression times an expression, multiply these two, gives me this trinomial. So now have I rewritten this as a product?
Yeah.
Yes. And does this times this multiply to give you that? And when you check by FOIL, distributive property, whatever you want to do, it does. So that is a way you can FOIL it out. All right?
What was the point of that?
Now what we need to do is we need to factor a solution where we have a negative middle term and a positive last term. So again, remember, when we're trying to factor, we're trying to undo our, we're trying to set this into two different binomials multiplied by each other. And the important thing to remember, when we looked at our factoring term, Markel, when we did our FOIL face, what we had was the first two terms always provided us with that, our first term in our trinomial when we multiply them. So I think of what two numbers in this case are going to provide me x squared. Well, that's going to be x times an x. Now, we need to think about what two numbers are going to provide us with 15. And this is going to be a little bit of an issue right here because there's multiple numbers that multiply to give us 15. So I gave you guys a little format to look at. And I told you, remember the quadratic form. So therefore, I told you to write C up here, B on the bottom, make a little dot for a multiplication, and a plus for addition. So C was equal to 15, and B was equal to a negative 8. Now, why do we use this? Because what I want you to do is, I want you to figure out what two numbers multiply to give you 15, but add to give you negative 8. Now think about all these numbers that add to give you 15. Remember, all the numbers that add to give you 15, so let's think about them. 15 could be 3 times 5, and 15 times 1, right? Also, you can do negative 3 times negative 5 equals negative 15 times negative 1. Now, remember I said this again. What two numbers multiply to give you 15, but add to give you a negative 8? Since this number is negative, which factors do I have to get? When you adding two positive numbers ever give you a negative number? No. So therefore, I don't even need to worry about my positive numbers, my positive factors. The only factors I can use are the two negative ones. So then which one of these add up to give me negative 8? Yes, Jason?
Negative 3 and negative 5.
So you write in negative 3 and negative 5. So your final answer would be x minus 3 and x minus 5. That's it, done. What I'd like to do, guys, is show you how to factor this x squared minus 11x plus 24. Now, previously, what we've done is we've worked on the kind of like the factors, and I showed you guys a way to set it up. So I'm just going to run through this a little bit quickly. And one thing we've talked about was using our quadratic form to help us create a little diamond triangle, or a diamond triangle, a little diamond, where up top we write our C and our B. So C in this case is going to be my number 24, and my B is going to be negative 11. Now what we did was we wrote a little multiplication symbol up here and a little addition symbol down here. So what that told us to do is to take the factors of 24, because those are going to be the two numbers that multiply to give you 24, but then we need to look at a unique set of numbers that are going to add to give us negative 11. Now, there's a little trick with this, and the trick is, if my two numbers are multiplying, that means they either have to be two positive numbers or they have to be two negative numbers. So we have 24 times plus negative 11. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write out the factors. And what I was explaining was, just remember the factors are going to be your two numbers that are going to multiply to give you 1. Now 24 times 1 works. Also, and like I said, negative 24 times negative 1 also works. But remember, if we're going to be adding our numbers to get a negative number, would ever adding two positive numbers ever give you a negative number? No. So what we're going to look at is we just need to look at the negative factors. We don't even need to worry about the positive factors. Let's just work out when both the factors are negative. So look at negative 24 and 1. Do I add them up equal negative 11? No. Then we just work down the list until you guys get really comfortable with this and you can start seeing it in your head. Negative 12 and 2? Nope. Negative 8 times 3, negative 3 gives you negative 11. So all I simply do is I write negative 8 there and negative 3. But remember, why are we doing this? We're not doing this so we can find out those two numbers. We want to create a binomial minus another binomial. And that is part of that factor method. So make sure for these problems that we put it as our factors. All right? And that's how you solve it.
The main important thing that I showed you guys how to do is I gave you guys a little tip that to help you guys out, and that was kind of working our diamond problem, where I said, remember, all quadratics can be in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c, where x is going to be your variable, and a, b, and c are real numbers, right? So the first thing we do is we multiply a times c up top. So 1 times negative 35 is negative 35, and then our b is negative 2. So what we do is we take the coefficient of our linear term, put it there, and we multiply our a times our c, which is 1 times negative 35. Then you guys need to look at the factors of negative 35 and say what two numbers multiply to give you negative 35, but add to give you negative 2. So you think about all the numbers that multiply to give you negative 35, which one of those are going to add to give you negative 2? And the answer is negative 7 and 5. Therefore, I can rewrite this polynomial as a product of two binomials, which is x minus 7 times x plus 5. This is exactly the same statement. It's just written in a different format, right? It's like me doing this. Well, we'll go through it in a second. So you guys have that. You can always double check. How can you double check this? What do we do when we have a binomial times a binomial? We do what? Rhymes with toil? Yeah, we FOIL, right? So you guys can FOIL and check your answer. But anyways, that is going to be the correct answer for factoring. All right? Very good. Oh, yeah, whoa, thank you. I was talking about maxes. Thank you. So our factors, we need to make sure for this problem, is going to be q minus 7 and q plus 5. Thank you. Very good. That's very important to make sure we do.
If I'm going to create this, all right, I told you the first thing you do, create your x. We create our c and our b. Our c, by using the quadratic form, remember it's bx plus c. So our c in this form, ax squared. Okay. Let's write this down because this is part of your homework, right? So you guys can have this one. This is a freebie. So if you guys have, the next thing I notice is my c is going to be negative 18, and my b is going to be a positive 3. So something that happened is really, really important. We now notice that I have my product. Remember, I put the multiplication dot and the addition below. So therefore, Josh, what I need to do is I need to multiply two numbers to give me a negative 18. So no longer do both of my factors have to be positive. So now I look at negative 18 and I say, what two numbers multiply to give me negative 18? And remember, for it to be negative, one of those factors has to be negative, right? Because a positive times a positive gives you a positive, and a negative times a negative is going to also give you a positive. So now let's look at the negative factors. I could have negative 18 times 1, or I could have 18 times negative 1, right? Do both of those provide you with a negative 18? Yes. Do either of those, when added up, give you a 3? No. So let's look at the next one. Negative 9 times 2, and 9 times negative 2. So just make sure, guys, you have to check both these solutions, because when you add these, you get different numbers. Negative 9 plus 2, I know multiply that gives you 18, but when you add them, negative 9 plus 2 gives you a negative 7, and 9 plus a negative 2 gives you a positive 7. But again, do they give us a 3? Nope. No. So let me work on the next one. Negative 6 times 3, and 6 times negative 3. Again, both of those multiply to give you a negative 18. and do one of those add to give you a positive 3? Well, here's the trick, okay? To get them to see which one is going to give you a positive 3, remember, this has to be positive. So therefore, since my middle term is positive, the larger of my two factors has to also be positive. Therefore, if you look at what's 6 plus a negative number, 6 plus negative 3. 6 plus negative 3, guys, gives you positive 3. So therefore, my two problems or my two factors here are going to be 6 and negative 3. Okay? Now, for this video, I'm going to show you how to write it out, even though we have not talked about it yet. But that's how we'd write the finalized answer. We have w squared plus w minus 56. So remember, guys, just when you're doing these problems, there's a couple tips and tricks I want to help you out with. Remember, when we're doing this, we got to remember a quadratic form, ax squared plus bx plus c. So when I draw my little triangle, my little diamond here, yeah, it's not a triangle, is it? I have my c on top, my b on bottom. C I'm going to multiply, b I'm going to add. My c is my number in front, which is the negative 56, and my b is my number in front of my w. Now we don't see a w, we don't see a number in front of there like we usually have. So just remember, if you don't see a number in front, we can always remember that 1 times that variable is going to equal that variable. So my number actually in front is going to be a 1, because w equals 1 times w, or 1 times w equals w. So if you're seeing this, understand that you could always have a 1 in front of it. So now, what we're going to do is I need to figure out what two numbers multiply to give me negative 56, but add to give me a positive 1. Now there's a couple tips and tricks I want to help you look out when you're trying to think of these. First of all, my number is negative, right? So I need to multiply two numbers to get a negative number. That means one of my factors has to be negative, the other one has to be positive, right? If they're both positive, I would have a positive, product. If they're both negative, I'd have a positive. So when I write negative 56, I can either write, let's work on the first term, which is always the easiest, negative 56 times 1, or 56 times negative 1. Now make sure you write both of these, because there's a big difference. Because they both multiply to give you negative 56, but when you add these, there's a difference. Negative 56 plus 1 is negative 55. 56 plus a negative 1 is a positive 55. So there's a big difference. However, I just said negative 55 or positive 55, right? We're looking for 1. So I go down the list and I say, okay, how about 28 times 2 times negative 2, and negative 28 times 2? Do any of those, when added up, equal 1?
No.
How about 8 times, I can do, 14 times 4, or negative 4? Negative 14 times 4? Do those add up? No. How about 8 times negative 7, or negative 8 times positive 7? And yes, they do. Now, the one thing to notice, you can start doing these in your head and think about them. Look at your middle term. If that's positive and you have a negative c term, if your middle term is positive, then the larger factor also has to be positive. Okay? So therefore, I automatically know that 8 had to be the positive one. When I looked at this problem, I first did it. Since this was negative, I know I had to have a positive and a negative. But when my middle term was positive, I knew that the larger factor had to be positive. So therefore, I have a positive 8 and a negative 7. I rewrite this as two binomials. It's going to be w plus 8 times w minus 7. And remember, why do we use the w's? Because remember, when we do FOIL, we multiply our first two terms. W times w gives us w squared. Our last term, 8 times negative 7, gives us negative 56. And then when we do this to FOIL to check our answer, that will give us our middle terms. All right? There's a couple of tips when looking into factoring this. Remember, we want to get this to be two separate binomials multiplied by each other. Remember, when we FOILed, we multiplied our first term times our first term and our last term times our last term, right? So we look at our first term, and our first term, what two numbers have to multiply to give us w squared? Well, for this problem, it's just going to be w times w. Now we need to look at what two numbers are going to multiply to give us negative 6. Man, TJ, you look rough. You all right, man? You want to go out and get a drink of water?
Yeah.
All right. So Line it that way, that way, that way, that way. So we look at this, we have w times w. So now I need to figure out what two terms multiply to give me negative 6. So we think about negative 6. Now remember, to get a negative number, we have to multiply a positive times a negative. What's wrong? We have to multiply a positive times a negative, right? So therefore, I can multiply negative 6 times 1. I can multiply a 6 times negative 1. That's my computer, don't worry about it. I can multiply negative 3 times 2. Or 3 times negative 2. Okay? All of those provide me a negative 6 when I multiply them, correct? All right? Now, before I even try to think about this, I gave you guys a little tip, right? I gave you guys this diamond to write, and I told you write C up top, B on the bottom, plus the dot. Dot means multiply, the plus means add. Let's write it as ax squared plus bx plus c. Therefore, my c is negative 6. Since there's no number in front, I know it's a negative 1. Now, since my b, what I need to do is figure out what two numbers multiply to give me negative 6, but add to give me negative 1. So here's the trick for this problem. When looking at this, when you have a negative number and a negative middle term, the larger of your two larger of your two numbers that you're multiplying has to be negative. So my only possible solution is when the negative number is bigger than the positive number. Does that make sense? I'll just say it again.
No.
Whenever you have a trinomial and you have a negative number as your last number, you know you have to multiply. One of those numbers has to be negative, right?
Yeah.
Then I said, what two numbers add up to give you your middle term, which is negative 1? Since that number is negative, you know that your only two products you could choose to add are the ones that have a larger negative number. Because think about it. Negative 6 plus 1 would give you negative 5, and negative 3 plus 2 gives you negative 1. These are the only two solutions that give you a negative answer. All right? So anyways, we look at these two. Which one of these would added up give us a negative 1? And it's going to be negative 3 and positive 2. So therefore, that's your answer. Done.
If you're going to do a problem like this in your head, the main important thing for factoring this is we're looking for our C and our B. We're looking for, this is what I'm doing in my head. You don't always have to write this down. What two numbers multiply to give me C, but then add to give me B? So in my head, I'm thinking of all the numbers that multiply to give me 18. And this is what you have to do in your head when you're going to do this mentally. You're going 18 times 1, 9 times 2, 6 times 3. So you think about all those numbers in your head. And then you think, all right, it's giving me a negative 18, but it's adding to give me a negative. That means all the larger factors have to be negative. Which of those add up to give me a negative 7?
Negative 9.
Right. So since in this case, if you remember, whatever your factors are, negative 9 and 2, we remember that those two numbers are in your factored, right? Without even putting them in the box. So I can write my factored form as x minus 9 times x plus 2. And then that would be done. OK?